The candidates for November are set.
I know Donald Trump's type.
Between now and Election Day,
we are not going back.
A campaign season unfolding faster.
Kamala Harris is not getting a promotion
Than any in recent history.
Make America great again.
Follow it all with new episodes every weekday on the NPR Politics Podcast.
Hearing static when you enter a tunnel in the middle of a fascinating story? Hanging out in your driveway to catch the end of a report? We've been there. With the KUOW app, you can listen to your favorite programs anytime and anywhere. No driveways required. Let's get going. Download the KUOW app now, available for iOS and Android.
Okay, I just pulled up at the gas station. Let's go fill the tank.
Washington has some of the highest gas prices in the country.
Nationally, the AAA ranks Washington state with the third highest price.
Right now, it says the price is $4.69 a gallon.
Gas never feels more expensive than when you're standing at the pump and just watching those numbers tick up.
And the grand total is $64.03. $64 feels like a lot. I'm remembering back to when I could fill up for like half of that.
I think gas prices are just one of those things that we tend to benchmark in our minds against a time when they were cheaper, or at least when they felt a lot cheaper.
Probably.
And a lot of us want to know, just why is gas more expensive here than in other places?
A new policy aimed at protecting the environment is a big reason why.
I'm Joshua McNichols.
And I'm Lucy Suchek.
And this is Booming, a podcast about the economic forces shaping our lives here in the Pacific Northwest. This November, Washington's groundbreaking effort to get companies to reduce their carbon footprints has put gas prices on the ballot. An initiative in our upcoming election claims it would reduce prices at the pump. But what if paying a little more for a tank of gas could actually save us money? That's coming up.
And finally, our biggest item of the night, the 22-foot Gentleman's Day Sailor sailboat. The winning bid was a whopping $20,000.
I won! That was my guess.
What?
I guessed 20,000.
Joey, it is an auction. You don't guess, you buy.
What?
We're going to get into what gas prices have to do with auctions in a minute. But first, Joshua, give me some context. How high are gas prices here?
Well, over the last decade or so, gas prices have gone up and down and up and down. Mm-hmm. They peaked about 2 years ago at $5.50 in Washington state. And in times when it was that high, people really got mad.
Yes, it has hit my pockets hard.
Today, gas is back to around $4 a gallon in Washington state, maybe half a dollar more if you live in the Seattle area. Actually, that's pretty close to what it was 20 years ago after you account for inflation. But the economics have become political.
Okay, tell me more about that. How so?
Well, the cost of gas in Washington has become a major talking point for people who don't like the state's environmentalism and its efforts to reduce the use of fossil fuels. Some people are saying the state's approach is making your gas more expensive.
Paid for primarily by middle-class working families who need to put fuel in their vehicles, who need to heat their homes, and are paying an indirect tax in the cost of gasoline, the cost of diesel fuel, the cost of any kind of carbon-based fuel.
So what do higher gas prices here have to do with the state's efforts to reduce the use of fossil fuels?
It has to do with something called carbon markets. Let me set the stage for you. When we drive our cars, we're burning gasoline, which puts carbon into the atmosphere. That's one of the biggest drivers of climate change. Washington state is trying something new. It put a price on carbon in order to try to slow carbon emissions over time. It's a pretty new program, just 2 years old, and it's called the Climate Commitment Act. Governor Jay Inslee, he considers it one of his greatest achievements.
The people of the state of Washington deserve a concrete, enforceable, pragmatic, economically growth-oriented limitation on pollution that they don't have to breathe. Washingtonians deserve that, and we're going to give it to them this year.
It's part of a plan to reduce carbon emissions by 95% by 2050. Programs like this are kind of new, right? And each one is precedent-setting in some way or another. And so economists all over the world are interested in how it plays out in Washington state. The reason why we're talking about it today is that this experiment in Washington could come to an end soon. There's an initiative to eliminate it and to prevent it from ever coming back. It's called Initiative 2117 or 2117. And that brings us back to gas prices because one of the initiative's main backers is making this argument that the program has driven up the cost of gas.
Okay, so is that actually true? Does this program raise the price of gas?
I'm going to lay out that math for you in just a minute. But first, I think it's important to understand how this program works. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as a cap and trade program. It's where companies buy, sell, and trade the right to emit carbon pollution.
Yeah, I've heard about the carbon market a lot. I feel like in my 8th grade science class, it was something that we talked about. But give me the carbon market 101.
Oh, I'm impressed with your 8th grade class.
Me too, actually, now that I think about it.
The market is made up of the top users of fossil fuel in the state. These include, gas companies, especially oil refineries. They include cities, like the city of Enumclaw's on the list. They include institutions like big hospitals and the University of Washington. All these companies and cities and institutions are invited to participate in an auction. They're bidding on something called carbon allowances. A carbon allowance allows them to emit 1 metric ton of carbon.
1 metric ton of carbon. Can we quantify that? How much is that exactly?
It's about the weight of a grand piano.
So if I was driving, how much carbon would that be?
Well, over the course of a year, your car probably emits 4 grand pianos worth of carbon. Carbon market auctions happen every 6 months. We just had one in September.
So when I think of an auction, I'm thinking of sitting in a big room and you have your own personal paddle and there's a speaker up front that is calling out all these numbers. And every time you put your paddle up to bid, the numbers get higher and higher. So if the numbers get too high, you realize it's not worth it anymore and you drop out. Is that what this auction is like?
Not exactly.
It really isn't that fancy. I'm sorry. I mean, the last auction, it's me and my colleague Norm sitting in my office, staring at my laptop, making sure we're in the right program.
I talked to this guy named David Woodson, and he represents the University of Washington in these auctions.
Like, I think the first time we did it, we kind of looked at each other like, that's it? Like, what do we do now? It might have taken us all of 30 seconds, right? As much as there was kind of all the sort of buildup of the day, there really wasn't much to it.
So it's not in some big auction hall somewhere. It's just in a little office looking at your laptop.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens in this auction is you bid on a certain number of carbon allowances. And the University of Washington is participating because it uses fossil fuels to heat its buildings. If it's an extra cold winter and the UW ends up needing more fuel, they can buy more allowances. But here's the catch. Every year, the supply of those carbon allowances goes down. And that's the point. Over time, the goal is to reduce overall emissions in Washington state. As the supply of carbon allowances goes down, the price to buy one goes up.
Yeah, this sounds like classic supply and demand economics.
Yeah, which keeps coming up in this podcast, right? It's really very simple. You can think of it like a game of musical chairs. In musical chairs, a chair gets removed every time. The chair represents the number of carbon allowances available. And over time, people leave the game because there aren't enough chairs.
I'm thinking back to when I played musical chairs a lot as a child, and I remember it being very fun and also very anxiety-inducing. Like when it gets to 2 or 3 people, you only have 1 or 2 chairs left, and it's harder and harder to stay in the game.
Yes, and this is exactly how the carbon market works too. Emitters, places that are burning fuel, leave the game because they decide it's not worth fighting for the carbon allowances that remain. And the idea is that eventually they'll decide it's worth their money to invest in reducing their carbon emissions instead of just buying more allowances.
Got it. So it's a way to get companies to stop using as much carbon. When the companies buy their carbon allowances, where does that money go?
Well, the program has actually collected more than $2 billion. And the money it raises goes to pay for projects that help us get to a low-carbon future faster and also survive climate change. It's already mapped out $9 billion worth of projects. For example, it pays for the state's new hybrid electric ferries. It's paid $12 million so far, and it has almost $500 million to go. And it would help the Yakima Nation put in a whole lot of solar panels. They're going to bury their farm irrigation systems underground and then put solar panels on top of that. There's a whole list of these projects all over the state.
So it sounds like this program is doing a lot. It's getting companies that are burning fuel and emitting greenhouse gas pollution to pay for the right to do that. And it's then taking that money and plowing it into other programs that will, help us reduce our use of fossil fuels and reduce the consequences of climate change.
Yeah, exactly.
So, getting back to that original question of why gas prices seem higher here than in other states, does this carbon market actually have something to do with that? Has it made our gas more expensive?
Yes, that's the short answer. People argue about the numbers, but when you boil it down, it looks like it adds about 20 cents to every gallon of gas. I get that number by comparing the gas here in Washington with the cost of gas in Oregon. The gas comes from the same place. You have to do a little math. You have to subtract out some taxes and some historical differences in prices between the two states. It's back-of-the-napkin math, but it's our best estimate.
So I have a Subaru Impreza. It holds about 14 gallons. How much would that add to my whole tank of gas?
Yeah, okay, let's see. 20 cents a gallon times 14 gallons comes to about $2.80.
$2.80 total, like per tank fill up?
Yeah, and some people are saying that this is too high a price to pay. And that's why Initiative 2117 is on your ballot this fall. Its goal is to kill the carbon market and make it impossible for anyone to create another one. I talked to Brian Haywood, the investor who's behind it. He made a lot of money by investing in Japanese companies, and he's been pouring some of that money into getting a bunch of initiatives on the ballot in Washington this fall, including 2117. He's been organizing rallies at gas stations to bring attention to the initiative.
I call it a hidden tax and I think that's exactly what it is. And the people that pay the price are the commuters. And gasoline, you make decisions. Ooh, do I pay in cash and I get 2 gallons or do I get 3 gallons, right? To me, it's a very tone-deaf program. It's very regressive and hits people right in the pocket.
He believes that as the price of carbon goes up, the price we pay for gas will follow.
It's going to go up.
He also says the climate crisis isn't as bad as people think, and he argues that the government isn't using the money responsibly.
Yeah, it feels like there's some philosophical arguments here on both sides, but we're an economy podcast, not a politics podcast. If you want politics, listen to Sound Politics, KUOW's new politics podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's stick to the economy. Bring us back to costs. What am I missing about the economics of all of this?
Well, Brian Haywood talks a lot about the cost of gas, but people who like the carbon market say that's not the best way to measure cost. They point to future costs that we often leave out. I heard this from a professor named Davide Pace at the University of Munich. He focuses on the economics of climate change and how people think about these carbon markets.
Why do people don't like high gasoline prices? Well, because that forces them to change their lifestyle. Part of the argument that often is missing is that climate change will change your life as well.
And that, of course, will have a price.
Yeah.
For example, if it gets too hot, you might turn up the air conditioning in your car.
But air conditioning costs energy, so maybe you pay the same price per gallon, but you end up using more gallons in order to keep yourself cool in your commute.
If the U.S. gets hit with more floods or more fires due to climate change, your home insurance will go up.
Climate change will make people pay, will make people change their lives. So the discussion is, which kind of change do we want to have? And how do we manage this change?
That's basically what this initiative's about, deciding how we pay. It seems like a new decision, but we've tried this kind of market before. Back in the 1980s, under the first George Bush administration, we used a similar market to regulate sulfur dioxide, which was a pollutant that was causing acid rain. And it worked.
This landmark legislation will reduce air pollution each year by 56 billion pounds. That's 224 pounds for every man, woman, and child in America.
When it comes to carbon markets, we're only the second state to do it, and the European Union has done one already. We don't have a crystal ball to truly quantify all the future costs of climate change, the fires, the floods, the heat, and the medical bills that stem from all that. But what we do know is that there will be costs. And in November, we'll all be voting on whether we want to pay some of those costs now or pay more later.
Coming up in the endgame, we're diving back into auctions.
Hi there, I'm Monica Guzman, host of A Braver Way podcast and your guide across the political divide. Are you done with the divisiveness in our politics and ready to do something about it? This season, we've partnered with KUOW to reach more listeners like you. Join me as I sit down with guests from across the political spectrum. Together, we'll share tools, insights, and messy, real-life stories to help you face this election year without losing heart. Listen to A Braver Way now on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, Joshua. Welcome back to the Endgame.
Hey.
We are going to return to auctions, not carbon auctions, lots of other different types of auctions. I've got a list of specialty items that were auctioned off, and I want you to guess the price that they were auctioned off for.
Okay.
So we're going to begin with a sports one. In late August of this year, Babe Ruth's jersey from the game where he pointed out to center field and then hit a home run in the 1932 World Series. So how much do you think his jersey was auctioned off for?
Oh, geez. I'm not good with sports memorabilia prices, but
this is really hard. And I will just say that if you get somewhere within the broad range of the number, that counts. So it doesn't have to be that specific.
Well, I heard a story recently about an early basketball card selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
Or being worth that. So
yeah.
For Babe Ruth, for something that old and that unique,
yes,
I think it's got to be a few million at least. So I'm going to
like your thought process.
Okay, so I'm going to say 5 million.
5 million. It was actually 24 million.
Oh,
but you're getting there. Like that's pretty close.
Okay.
It was the most expensive sports collectible ever.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, next we have an art example. This is a framed picture from street artist Banksy called Girl with Balloon. Very famous. I'm sure you heard of it.
Uh-huh.
Guess how much this sold for?
Okay. Well, with art stuff, I know people treat those as investments as much as anything else, and that can drive up the price even higher than somebody might think an individual painting might be worth. So, I don't know, 20 million.
20 million. It was 1.4 million.
I was way off.
But here's what happened. After it was auctioned off, it was immediately shredded in front of the live auction audience.
What?
Yeah, he built a shredder into the frame. So it was like this epic stunt that, of course, you would expect from an artist like Banksy. Okay, our last one has to do with food. This is a 4.5 pound block of cheese called cabrales. And this piece of cheese holds the Guinness World Record for the most expensive cheese ever sold at an auction. It's a semi-hard, very strong blue cheese, and it comes from a small region in the north of Spain. There are particular ways that it must be aged. It must be aged in caves nearby. And, it pairs well with balsamic vinegar, some honey. So, how much do you think it's sold for?
Okay, so 4.5 pound. So that's like
that's a heavy block of cheese.
That's a heavy block of cheese. It's more than like the Tillamook loaf that I buy. But I guess I should think about this in terms of cost per pound. So I'm imagining that a pound of very expensive cheese might go for like, $500. So if you take 5 pounds of that, I guess $2,500, $2,500.
$22,000. Yeah, $22,787 to be exact.
So I needed to add another 0 to be anywhere in the ballpark.
Yeah.
That would make one heck of a grilled cheese sandwich.
Oh, it would. And you know what? We've got a recipe for you listeners. Check the show notes for a Bon Appetit recipe with cabrales cheese if you ever get a chance to make it. Well, good job, Joshua. I feel like you did very well compared to what I think I would do.
I might have done a little bit better if we were looking at auction prices for commercial buildings in downtown Seattle.
That's true. You know a lot about
that. That's my only
that.
area of expertise.
That's it for Booming. Do you have a question about what's happening in our economy? Email us at booming@kuow.org.
And, we've been talking about our pledge drive recently, trying to get, people to donate money to KUOW. Just the other morning, I was pitching on the air, asking for donations, and somebody gave a shout out to Booming, one of the listeners. She's like, this is why I'm giving. And
my gosh, that's so nice.
Yeah, my heart was touched. And so we know you are out there, listeners, who want to support KUOW in this way and keep this kind of programming going. So thank you, and join them and do it yourself if you haven't yet.
Yeah, and thank you so much to everyone who contributed last week during our pledge drive. We really appreciate it. If you want to help out even more, we still welcome donations. Go to kuow.org/booming. This episode was produced by Whitney Henry Lester. Our editor is Carol Smith. I'm Lucy Suchek.
And I'm Joshua McNichols.
And we'll catch you next time.